Imagine the person you raised, the child you loved, becoming your jailer. Picture them smiling sweetly as they lock you away in the cold, dark attic of your own home. Just so you don't inconvenience their dinner party. This isn't a twisted fairy tale. It's the true story of Elizabeth, a 72-year-old grandmother who was systematically erased by her own family. But what her daughter didn't know was that a loose floorboard, a secret kindness, and a single $1 gamble were about to ignite a fire that would burn their perfect world to the ground. The final act of this story is something no one saw coming, so make sure you follow, like, and hit that notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss how this quiet grandmother architected the most staggering revenge imaginable. The lock on the attic door clicked shut with a sound that was both soft and final. It wasn't a heavy metallic clang like a prison door, but a quiet, domestic little sound, the kind of sound a bathroom lock makes. It was somehow worse. It was the sound of casual cruelty, of imprisonment as a household chore. On the other side of the door, Charlotte's voice, syrupy and smooth, flowed through the wood. "There now, Mum. It's for the best. You'll be comfortable. Mark's partners are, well, you know how these things are. All about appearances. We just can't have you wandering around looking confused. It would be unsettling for everyone." Elizabeth stood motionless in the centre of the attic, her hand still raised slightly, as if she'd been about to touch the door that was now locked to her. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She had learned long ago that her words were like stones dropped into a deep, dark well. They fell and were swallowed by a silence that didn't care. The only thing that mattered was Charlotte's narrative. Downstairs, the performance had already begun. The doorbell chimed, its cheerful, electronic tune a jarring contrast to the cold, dusty air Elizabeth was breathing. She heard the murmur of polite greetings, the confident boom of her son-in-law Mark welcoming their guests. Laughter, light and artificial, drifted up through the floorboards, the clinking of glasses, the soundtrack of a life she was no longer a part of, happening directly beneath her feet. She shuffled over to the single, grimy window set low in the eaves. It offered a sliver of the world outside, the manicured lawn of her next-door neighbour, the tops of the maple trees that gave the creek and the town its name. It was her house. She and Richard had built it. They had chosen the shade of white for the siding, planted the rose bushes that now struggled for life under Charlotte's neglect, and watched their daughter play on a swing set in the backyard, where a sterile grey patio now sat. The memories were so vivid they were almost physical, ghosts that brushed against her in the narrow confines of the attic. The space wasn't large. Unfinished wooden beams crisscrossed above her head, draped in cobwebs that shivered in the draught. The floor was rough, uneven planks of raw pine, and in the corner sat her designated space, a thin, stained mattress, a flat pillow, and a threadbare blanket. A single, bare bulb hanging from a wire cast a weak, yellow light that seemed to be absorbed by the oppressive shadows rather than pushing them back. It was a place for things that were forgotten. Old furniture, holiday decorations, discarded toys, and now, her. Her hip ached, a deep, persistent throb that had become a constant companion. She lowered herself slowly onto the mattress, the springs groaning in protest. The cold of the floor seeped through instantly, a damp chill that went straight to her bones. From her pocket she pulled a small, worn handkerchief and dabbed at her forehead, though she wasn't sweating. It was just a habit. A small, familiar motion in a world that had become terrifyingly unfamiliar. She could map out the evening without seeing it. Charlotte would be playing the perfect hostess, her smile never faltering. She'd move through the living room with a practiced grace, refilling wine glasses, her conversation sprinkled with anecdotes about her wonderful family, her successful husband, a brilliant son. And at some point, Elizabeth knew, she would pull out her phone. She didn't have to see it to know it was happening. It was as much a part of the routine as the click of the lock. Downstairs, in the warm, bright light of the party, Charlotte was curating her life. She was probably framing the shot right now.
有斗孽和满气带上模字时，显机烟你。
Mark, laughing with his business partner. Leo, her grandson, looking handsome and bored in a way that could pass for sophisticated, a bottle of expensive wine artfully placed in the foreground. The caption would be effortless, something like, "Another beautiful evening with the people who matter most. So incredibly #blessed to have this life. #family first. #making memories. #love." The hypocrisy was a blade that had long ago stopped feeling sharp. It was just a dull, heavy pressure now, a weight on her chest. The real Charlotte, the one who saw her own mother as a piece of inconvenient furniture, was invisible to the world. In her place was this curated mirage, this smiling woman who collected likes and hearts as validation for a life that was, up close, a masterpiece of cold, calculated neglect. Elizabeth's gaze drifted from the grimy window to a spot on the floor a few feet from her mattress. To an outsider it was nothing, just another plank of wood. But she knew better. She had discovered it years ago, shortly after Richard died, when she'd been storing his old suits. One of the boards was slightly shorter than the others. It didn't creak when you stepped on it, but if you pressed on the edge just right, it would lift. It was her only secret, a tiny, insignificant flaw in the construction of her prison. Inside there was nothing of value, just a small dark space, a hollow void under the floor. But it was hers. A piece of the house that Charlotte and Mark didn't know about, a place their control couldn't reach. She ran her fingers over the rough grain of the wood above it, the splintery texture a small grounding reality. She didn't lift it, not tonight. Just knowing it was there was enough. It was a promise, though she didn't know for what. A burst of loud masculine laughter erupted from below. Mark. It rumbled through the floor, vibrating in her teeth. It wasn't a sound of genuine joy. It was a sound of performance, a sound of dominance. It was a cheap, hollow echo of another man's laugh, a laugh that had once been the law in this house. The attic seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. Mark's laugh faded, and in its place, she heard Richard's. The memory was as clear as the dust motes, dancing in the single beam of light. It wasn't from the grand, important moments of her life, but from a small, forgotten afternoon, decades ago. Charlotte was 8, all skinny legs and scraped knees, her face crumpled in tears. She'd fallen off her new bicycle, the one with the glittering tassels on the handlebars. Richard hadn't rushed to comfort her. He had stood over her, his shadow falling across her small, sobbing form, his face a mask of disappointment. "Get up, Charlotte," he'd said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a command that couldn't be disobeyed. She had looked up at him, her lip trembling. "It hurts, Daddy." "Of course it hurts. That's what happens when you're careless, he'd replied, not unkindly, but with a chilling lack of warmth. He crouched down, but not to help her up. He pointed a stern finger at her tear-streaked face. Stop that. Stop it right now. Harrises don't cry. Tears are for the weak. They're a stain, you understand me? A stain? And what do we do with stains, Charlotte? Her little voice was barely a whisper. We wash them out? That's right, Richard had said, his voice softening with approval. We wash them out. We don't display them for the world to see. Now get up, brush yourself off, and get back on that bicycle. Elizabeth, watching from the kitchen window, had felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had wanted to run out, to scoop her daughter into her arms and tell her it was okay to cry, that pain was a part of life, not a mark of failure. But she hadn't. The fear of Richard's disapproval, of being labelled weak herself, had kept her rooted to the spot, a silent accomplice to the slow poisoning of her own child. And now, 40 years later, the poison had fully taken root. Charlotte had learned her father's lesson all too well. Weakness was a stain. Old age, with its frailty, its forgetfulness, its quiet dignity, that Charlotte mistook for pathetic helplessness, was the biggest stain of all. And Charlotte was determined to wash it out, to scrub it from her perfect, curated life, even if the stain was her own mother. The sounds from the party began to thin. The murmur of conversation gave way to farewells. Car doors slammed shut in the driveway. The house fell into a new kind of silence. Not the oppressive silence of the attic, but the empty, echoing quiet of a space recently vacated. Elizabeth listened to the familiar nighttime routine begin below her. The dishwasher being loaded, the thud of Mark's briefcase on the hall table, the click of the television. She lay on the mattress, her eyes closed, trying to will herself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. The cold was too deep, the humiliation too fresh. Hours seemed to pass. Then she heard it. A sound so faint, she almost thought she'd imagined it. A soft creak on the attic stairs. Her body went rigid. It wasn't Charlotte or Mark. Their footsteps were heavy, confident. This was a light, hesitant sound. The sound of someone trying not to be heard. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. There was a long pause. Elizabeth held her breath. She heard a soft scraping sound against the bottom of the door. A dark rectangle slid into the sliver of light under the door. A tray. On it was a small plate with 2 miniature quiches, the kind served at parties. A glass of cold water with ice cubes still clinking softly, and a thick wool blanket folded neatly. It was the good blanket from the guest room. A shadow fell in the crack of light. A voice, barely a whisper, strained and full of a shame that wasn't his to carry. Grandma? Leo. Her heart ached. Not with the cold, but with a sudden, overwhelming wave of love and sorrow. He was the only one who saw her, who dared to defy the unspoken rules of the house. Leo, she whispered back, her voice raspy from disuse.
Thank you. They fell asleep on the couch, he said, the words rushing out. I'm sorry about this. It's not right. She wanted to tell him it was okay, to tell him not to feel guilty, not to risk his parents' wrath for her. But she couldn't, because it wasn't okay, and his guilt was the only sign in this whole damned house that a conscience still existed. "Be careful, my love," she said instead. The shadow lingered for a moment more, then it was gone. The soft, creaking footsteps receded down the stairs. Elizabeth pulled the tray towards her. The quiche was cold, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She drank the ice water, the cold a welcome shock. Then she unfolded the blanket. It smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, the scent of the guest room linen closet. The scent of a part of the house she was no longer welcome in. She wrapped it around her shoulders, the thick wool a shield against the attic's chill. It was a small act of rebellion, a smuggled comfort. For the first time all night, she felt a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. It was the warmth of knowing she was not entirely alone. It was a fragile, desperate kind of hope, but it was there. The next few days passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and chilling silence. Elizabeth was allowed out of the attic, back into the main house, where she existed as a ghost in her own home. She would sit in the armchair in the corner of the living room, the one Richard had always used, and watch as life moved around her. Charlotte would talk to her, but not with her. Her voice always pitched with that same condescending sweetness, asking questions she didn't wait to hear the answers to. "Did you have a good sleep, Mum? You're looking a little tired today. Are you remembering to take your pills?" Mark would just nod at her, a curt, dismissive gesture, his eyes already on his phone, scrolling through stock prices or news headlines. They treated her like a child, a pet, a problem to be managed. Then came the morning it all broke. They sat her down in the dining room. Not the living room, with its pretense of comfort, but the formal dining room which they only used for holidays and apparently for ambushes. The long, polished table felt like a battlefield. Charlotte and Mark sat on one side, a united front. Elizabeth sat on the other, alone. A sheaf of papers lay on the table between them, held in a neat, professional-looking folder. "Mum?" Charlotte began, folding her hands primly on the table. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were hard. "Mark and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. We think it's time to start thinking about the future," Mark chimed in, leaning forward slightly. He was trying to look earnest, concerned. It didn't suit him. "Your security, your long-term care." Elizabeth looked at the papers. She didn't need to read them to know what they were. She had felt this coming for months, a storm gathering on the horizon. "We've found a wonderful place," Charlotte continued, her voice glowing with false enthusiasm. "It's called Meadowview Gardens. It's a community. You'll have friends your own age, activities, round-the-clock nursing staff. You won't have to worry about a thing." Meadowview Gardens. The name sounded lovely. Elizabeth knew better. She had seen the brochure that had come in the mail, addressed to Charlotte, which she'd quickly hidden. It was a state-run facility on the other side of the county, the kind of place you went when you had no other options. The kind of place with linoleum floors and the faint, persistent smell of disinfectant and despair. "This house," Mark said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the walls around them, "it's too much for you. It's too much for us to manage on top of everything else. The upkeep, the taxes." He let the sentence hang in the air. "We've had these drawn up by our lawyer," Charlotte said, sliding the folder across the table. It stopped just in front of Elizabeth. "It's very simple. You sign the house over to us. In exchange, we guarantee your lifelong care at Meadowview. It's all in there. It's the sensible thing to do." Lifelong care. The words were a euphemism for a cage. They wanted her house, the last thing of value she possessed. The house Richard had left to her, and her alone, in his will. A final surprising act of love, or perhaps of control even from the grave.
that had infuriated Charlotte to no end. They wanted to trade it for a bed in the cheapest home they could find, and then they would sell it, erase the last trace of her, and use the money to fund their perfect #blessed life. Elizabeth stared at the folder. Her hands resting in her lap were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so cold and so deep it felt like it was freezing her from the inside out. She looked up, first at Mark with his greedy, impatient eyes, and then at her daughter. She searched Charlotte's face for a flicker of something, doubt, guilt, love. She found nothing. Only the same hard, determined look her father used to wear when he was closing a business deal. "No," Elizabeth said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a slamming door. Charlotte's smile tightened. "Mom, don't be difficult. This is for your own good." "No," Elizabeth repeated, a little stronger this time. "This is my house." Mark sighed, a theatrical display of exhausted patience. He glanced at Charlotte, a silent communication passing between them. The good cop, bad cop routine was over. "Elizabeth," Mark said, dropping the pretense of familiarity, "we were hoping it wouldn't come to this, but we've already spoken to Dr. Evans. He's a friend of the family. He's prepared to testify that your behaviour has become erratic, that your memory is failing, that you're a danger to yourself." "We can file for a conservatorship," Charlotte added, her voice now stripped of all its sweetness, leaving only cold, hard steel. "We can petition the court to declare you mentally incompetent. A judge will look at the situation. A 72-year-old woman living in a big house she can't possibly care for, with a loving family ready to ensure her safety, and they will see it our way. They always do. We will get control of your affairs, including this house. The only difference is that if you force us to do it that way, it will be unpleasant for you." The threat was no longer veiled. It was laid bare on the polished dining room table, as stark and ugly as the documents in the folder. They would strip her of her home, her autonomy, her very identity as a sane and capable adult. They would use the law as a weapon to do it, and they would smile while they signed the papers that would commit her to a living death. Elizabeth felt the air leave her lungs, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a vast, empty coldness. They had thought of everything. They had her trapped. She looked at her daughter, at the woman who had grown from the little girl with the scraped knees, and she saw a stranger with her father's eyes.
I need to think,"
she stammered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Charlotte and Mark exchanged another look. This one was triumphant. They had won. They knew it.
"Of course, Mom,"
Charlotte said, her voice softening back into its syrupy, false kindness.
"Take the day. We only want what's best for you. You know that."
They left the folder on the table and walked out of the room, their mission accomplished. Elizabeth sat there for a long time staring at the closed folder. It looked like a tombstone. The next morning she was granted her one weekly privilege, a supervised trip to the local grocery store. Charlotte drove her, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. Charlotte was humming along to some vapid pop song on the radio, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, radiating an aura of cheerful victory. As Elizabeth walked through the automatic doors of the brightly lit store, the mundane reality of it all felt like a slap in the face. People were squeezing avocados, comparing prices on cereal, complaining about the length of the checkout line. They were living their lives, blissfully unaware of the silent, invisible prisons that could be built around a person. She went through the motions, putting a loaf of whole wheat bread, a carton of milk and a small block of cheese into her basket. Her allowance, the pittance Charlotte gave her each week from her own pension funds, was barely enough for the essentials. She reached the checkout, her hands moving automatically, placing the items on the conveyor belt. The total came to $13.04. She handed the cashier a $20 bill from her purse. As the woman counted back her change, Elizabeth's eyes fell on a display next to the register. A bright, garish sign with flashing lights. Powerball! Tonight's jackpot, $450 million. All you need is $1 and a dream. A dream. She hadn't had one of those in years. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but as the cashier placed the change in her palm, a $5 bill, a $1 bill, and some coins, something shifted inside her. It wasn't hope. It was something else. Something harder, sharper. It was defiance. They had taken her freedom, her dignity, her home. They were about to take her future. They controlled what she ate, where she slept, who she spoke to. They controlled her money, doling it out in humiliating little sums. But this $6.96 in her hand, for this one moment, it was hers. "I need to get one more thing," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She left her groceries at the counter and walked back down the aisle, her heart starting to beat a little faster. She picked up the cheapest loaf of white bread on the shelf, the kind that cost $1.99. She returned to the checkout. The cashier voided the previous transaction and rang her up again. The new total was lower. Elizabeth looked at the money in her hand. She had just enough. She walked over to the lottery machine, her movements feeling slow, deliberate, heavy with the significance no one else could see. She could feel Charlotte's impatient glare from the car. She knew she was taking too long, but she didn't care. She slid 2 $1 bills, the last of her own money, into the slot. She didn't pick the numbers. She didn't have any lucky ones. She pressed the quick pick button. The machine whirred and spat out a small slip of paper. She took it. It was flimsy, unimportant, a piece of trash in waiting. But as her fingers closed around it, it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. It wasn't an act of hope. She had no illusions about winning. The odds were astronomical, a fool's game. This was something else entirely. This was an act of pure, desperate defiance. A secret she could hold, just like the loose floorboard in the attic. It was a $1 scream into the void, a final, silent gesture that said, "I am still here. I am not erased yet." And this one thing, this one tiny, improbable thing, is mine. She folded the slip of paper carefully, twice, and tucked it deep into the zippered compartment of her worn purse. She picked up her grocery bag and walked out of the store, into the bright sunlight, her back straight, her steps measured. She got into the car, not looking at Charlotte. The weight of the ultimatum, the legal papers, the impending doom of Meadowview Gardens was still there. But it was joined by something else now. The tiny, secret weight of a Powerball ticket. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a solution. But it was a beginning. It was the first stone she had thrown back at the silent, deep well that was trying to swallow her whole. The muffled thud of a bass line pulsed through the floorboards, a heartbeat for a party she was not invited to. Up here in the cold, the only rhythm was the shallow cadence of her own breath, misting in the dim light filtering through the grimy single window. It had been days since the $1 bet, a gesture of defiance that had felt as small and useless as a single falling leaf in a storm. Now, Another of Charlotte's carefully curated evenings was underway downstairs, another night of feigned family perfection for Instagram, while the family's matriarch was stored away like a broken heirloom. Elizabeth didn't feel the cold tonight. Not really. She was a creature of the attic now, adapted to the chill and the dust. She slid her hand into the pocket of her thin cardigan, and her fingers closed around the smooth, cool plastic of the burner phone Leo had slipped her. A lifeline, a secret. With movements that had become fluid from practice, she knelt and worked her fingers under the edge of the 5th floorboard from the wall. It lifted with a soft groan of old wood. From the hollow beneath, she retrieved the flimsy slip of paper, the Powerball ticket. She smoothed it out on the dusty floor, the numbers a stark black against the white. She turned on the phone. The small screen flared to life, a painful slash of light in the gloom. Her fingers, stiff with age and cold, fumbled on the tiny keypad as she navigated to the state lottery website. The page loaded with agonizing slowness. There they were, the winning numbers displayed in a neat, cheerful row. Her eyes scanned from the ticket to the screen. 08, a match. Her heart didn't leap, it just gave a single hard thump against her ribs. 27, a second match. The air in her lungs seemed to thicken, turning heavy like water. 34, match. She wasn't breathing, she was simply observing the facts as they presented themselves. 39. Match. It was like watching a verdict being read. Inescapable. Absolute. 42. Match. A low hum started behind her ears, the sound of a distant, powerful engine starting up. And the Powerball. 10. A perfect match. All 6. $450 million. She stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. The numbers didn't change. They stared back, placid and unblinking. There was no surge of joy, no triumphant laugh, no tears of relief. The shock was a physical thing. A silent, internal explosion that vaporized every feeling she had. Her grief for Richard, her gnawing loneliness, the daily humiliation at the hands of her daughter, all of it was incinerated in an instant. Her body went numb, a pins and needles sensation that started in her fingertips and spread inward, consuming her. Then, following the numbness, came the hum. It grew louder, filling her, an electric current that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. It wasn't warmth, it was power. Cold and pure and sharp, like the edge of a shard of glass. She carefully folded the ticket, placed it back in its wooden tomb, and fitted the floorboard back into place. It settled with a sigh of dust. She sat back on her heels in the dark, the phone's light now extinguished. She didn't need it anymore. The numbers were burned into her mind. Downstairs, a peal of Charlotte's laughter cut through the music. It sounded different now. Not like the blade of a knife, but like the foolish chirping of a bird, unaware of the hawk circling high above. Elizabeth's mind, once a fog of sorrow and resignation, was now a landscape of terrifying clarity. The thoughts were not her own, not the thoughts of the woman who had cried herself to sleep on this very floor just last week. These were the thoughts of something new, something that had been forged in this cold, dark crucible. Her first thought was not of a beach house in Florida or a trip around the world. It wasn't of a comfortable life, free from her daughter's cruelty. Her first thought was of justice, Not the clean, balanced justice of a courtroom, but something older, something elemental, a grotesque, biblical justice. The kind of justice that didn't just punish, but remade the world in its own image. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she began to think, she began to build. The opportunity came 2 nights later. Mark was out, a boys' night that was really a networking session with some other soulless suit from his firm. Charlotte was glued to her laptop, scrolling through social media, her face illuminated by the screen, a mask of vague dissatisfaction. "Leo," she'd called from the kitchen, her voice flat, "take this up to your grandmother, and for God's sake, don't linger. I don't want you catching her mood." The tray held a bowl of watery soup and a slice of dry bread. Leo's face was a stony mask as he took it. He met Elizabeth's eyes for only a second, but it was enough. He found her sitting on the edge of the cot, a grey blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He set the tray down on the small crate beside her. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice cracking. The door was closed, but he still spoke as if the walls themselves were listening. Elizabeth didn't look at the soup. She looked at him, at this boy, this good, kind boy trapped in this house with her. He was 16, but his eyes held the weariness of a man twice his age. He was her only ally, her only source of warmth. And he was a child. The thought sent a pang through the cold armor she was building around her heart. She couldn't ask this of him, but she had to. "Leo," she said, her voice quiet but firm, stripped of its usual waver. "I need to show you something, and you must promise me on your life that you will not speak of it to anyone." He saw the change in her, the new steel in her spine. He nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I promise." She lifted the floorboard. He watched, mystified, as she pulled out the lottery ticket. She handed it to him. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "It's from last week," she said. "I bought it with the last $2 in my purse." Leo pulled out his own phone, his movements quick and sure. He scanned the ticket's barcode with an app. His eyes widened. He looked from his phone to her, then back to his phone. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "It can't be," he breathed, sinking to his knees on the floor beside her. "Grandma, is this real?" $450 million, she confirmed, her voice a dead flat monotone. "The cash option is significantly less, but still more than enough." Leo stared at her. The terror was plain on his face. This wasn't a ticket to freedom in his eyes. It was a bomb. He knew his parents. He knew what they would do for a fraction of this amount. They would tear her apart. They would have her declared legally insane, take control of everything, and she would disappear into the cheapest, darkest nursing home they could find. The money would be a death sentence. "We can't," he stammered, shaking his head, handing the ticket back as if it were burning him. "We can't claim it. They'll find out. Mom, Dad, They will not find out," Elizabeth said. And in that moment, Leo saw it, the ice, the terrifying clarity that had replaced his grandmother's grief. "Because I am not going to claim it. Not as Elizabeth Harris." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You are good with computers, Leo. Your mother complains about it constantly. She says you live in the dark corners of the internet." He nodded slowly. I know my way around." "I need a ghost," she said, "a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who doesn't exist on company websites or billboards. Someone who specializes in secrets, in protecting assets from predators."
Someone utterly ruthless and completely invisible. She paused. I need you to go into those dark corners, Leo. I need you to find me a shark. For the next 3 nights, while the house slept, the attic became a command center. Leo, using encrypted browsers and layers of proxy servers, delved into forums and networks Elizabeth couldn't even imagine. He found whispers of a name, a legend in circles where the ultra-wealthy hide their fortunes from divorce, from governments, from their own grasping families. They didn't use her name. They called her the Shark. Her real name was Anya Sharma, a disgraced former prosecutor from New York who had reinvented herself as the ultimate legal firewall, operating out of an anonymous office in Wyoming. She took clients by referral only, communicated through military-grade encryption, and was said to be merciless. Leo set it up, a secure video call routed through servers in 3 different countries. He produced a small black device, a voice modulator. She'll never hear your real voice, Grandma. She'll never see your real face. The video feed will be pixelated. It's the best I can do for untraceable. That night, Elizabeth sat before the burner phone's small screen. A heavily distorted, pixelated face appeared. It was impossible to make out any features, but the voice that spoke was sharp, clear, and devoid of any warmth. You have 60 seconds to convince me this isn't a waste of my time. Start. Elizabeth held the voice modulator to her throat. The voice that emerged was a low, robotic rasp, a voice of pure function. I hold a winning Powerball ticket for $450 million. It is unclaimed. I am currently a prisoner in my own home, at the mercy of my daughter and her husband, who are in the process of having me declared legally incompetent so they can seize my assets. The primary asset being the house I am in. There was a long silence from the other end. The pixelated face was still. That is a unique situation, Anya Sharma's voice finally said. The 60-second timer had been forgotten. Most of my clients are trying to hide their money. You're trying to use yours as a weapon without ever touching it. I am not interested in a new life, the robotic voice of Elizabeth Harris rasped. I'm not interested in escaping. I am interested in building a prison. I want to use their greed, their cruelty, and the law itself to wall them in until they are left with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. I want them to live out their days in a monument to their own failure. I will pay you 20% of the pre-tax winnings to make that happen. Another pause, longer this time. Elizabeth could almost hear the calculations clicking away behind the distorted image. This wasn't just a case. It was a masterpiece of legal warfare. Wire a retainer of $50,000 to the account I'm sending you now, Anya's voice said, a new note of interest, of professional hunger in her tone. Use the trust structure I'm outlining. We have a lot of work to do. And Mrs. Harris, welcome. The first salvo from Charlotte and Mark came sooner than she expected. A thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Elizabeth was in the living room dusting the mantelpiece, a performance of domestic normalcy, when Mark came in waving it. Well, Mum, it's a shame it's come to this, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Charlotte stood behind him, her arms crossed, a pained, martyred expression on her face. We're just so worried about you. He tore it open. It's a petition for conservatorship, he announced, as if she wouldn't know. Just a formality, really, to allow us to manage your affairs, make sure you're taken care of. We've got a sworn statement from Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans.
their family friend, the man who came over for barbecues and laughed at Mark's terrible jokes. He'd done an evaluation last week, a cosy chat in the kitchen where he'd asked her if she remembered what she'd had for breakfast, and clucked sympathetically when she'd pretended to forget. "It mentions your forgetfulness," Charlotte said softly, stepping forward. "The erratic behaviour, getting lost on your walks. We just can't bear to see you like this, Mum. We have to step in." This was it, the first obstacle. The cage of law they were trying to build around her. The old Elizabeth would have crumpled. She would have cried, pleaded. The new Elizabeth felt a cold calm settle over her. She looked at them, at their rehearsed expressions of concern, and she began her performance. Her hand went to her cheek, her eyes widening with a carefully crafted confusion. "Conservatorship? I don't understand. Manage my affairs, but I feel fine." Her voice was frail, trembling. "We know you do, sweetheart," gorged Charlotte said, her voice like poison honey. "That's part of the problem, Dr. Evans agrees. This is what's best." "The hearing is in 3 weeks, Mark said, all business. "It should be straightforward." He tossed the papers onto the coffee table. They fanned out a declaration of war written in dense legalese. That night, the attic was lit again by the glow of the phone. "They've filed," Elizabeth's modulated voice reported to the pixelated face of Anya Sharma. "They have a doctor's evaluation. It's all lies, but it's on paper." "Of course they do," Anya's voice replied, sharp and untroubled. "Amateurs always lead with their best punch. My firm filed our counter-petition an hour ago. We are demanding a full, independent psychiatric evaluation by a court-appointed, board-certified panel of 3 doctors. We've cited elder abuse, coercion, and financial malfeasance. We are not defending Mrs. Harris, we are attacking." "They think I'm weak," Elizabeth rasped. "They see me every day. They won't believe I'm capable of fighting back." "That is our greatest weapon," Anya said. "At home, you're a ghost. You are frail, confused, exactly what they want to see. You will play the part of a woman losing her grip. You will forget names. You will seem lost in your own house. It must be a flawless performance. But for the court's doctors, you will be the sharpest, most lucid 72-year-old woman they have ever met. You will recount every instance of abuse with perfect, chilling detail. You will be 2 different people, Elizabeth. Can you do that?" "I'm already doing it," she replied. The next few weeks were a draining, high-stakes tightrope walk. At home, she was a spectre of her former self. She would stand in the middle of a room, looking lost. She would call Mark Richard. Once she poured orange juice into Charlotte's coffee, then looked at the cup with bewildered tears in her eyes. Charlotte had sighed with theatrical frustration, exchanging a look with Mark that said, "See, it's getting worse." But in the dead of night, she was a warrior. She sat with the burner phone, being coached by Anya's legal team. They drilled her, prepped her for the evaluation. They taught her the specific language to use, how to frame her experiences not as emotional complaints, but as a pattern of calculated abuse. The evaluation with Dr. Evans had been a farce. He sat across from her at the dining room table, his manner patronizing. "Now, Elizabeth," he'd said, patting her hand, "Charlotte tells me you've been having some trouble with your memory lately." "Sometimes," she'd murmured, looking down at her lap, "I get muddled." "Do you know what year it is?" She hesitated, letting the silence stretch. "Is it 2024? He'd made a note on his pad, a little tick of confirmation. Inside, Elizabeth's mind was a fortress. She was watching him, dissecting him. She saw the friendship with Mark and Charlotte in the casualness of his questions, the predetermined conclusion in the slope of his shoulders. He wasn't a doctor. He was a rubber stamp. The court-appointed evaluation was different. It took place in a sterile, neutral office downtown. 3 doctors, 2 men, 1 woman. Their faces were impassive, their questions precise. There was no hand-patting. Here, the other Elizabeth emerged, the real one. My daughter has locked me in our unheated attic on at least 14 separate occasions in the last 6 months, she began, her voice clear and steady. Usually when she is entertaining business guests she wishes to impress. She controls my access to my own money, providing me with a small allowance that is often withheld as a form of punishment. They are pressuring me to sign over the deed to my house, a property that has been in my family for 3 generations, under the threat of institutionalization. She detailed dates, times, conversations she had overheard. The doctors listened, their pens flying across their notepads. They asked follow-up questions, sharp and probing. She answered every one without hesitation, her mind a steel trap. She was lucid, she was intelligent, she was a woman under siege fighting for her life. Walking out of that office, leaning on Leo's arm for show, she felt the immense strain of the dual performance. It was like holding a live wire in each hand. But as she got into the car, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the window. Her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of an architect, drawing up her blueprints. The days leading up to the hearing were a quiet storm. Elizabeth kept to her role, a fragile ghost haunting the hallways of her own home. The strain was immense, but the plan was in motion, a vast and complex machine she had set running. It was during one of these long, quiet afternoons that she found the second obstacle. It wasn't a legal document or a threat from her daughter. It was far more dangerous. She was in the attic, seeking the familiar solace of the cold and quiet, when her hand brushed against something beneath the loose floorboard where the ticket was hidden. It wasn't the ticket. It was something larger, heavier. She pulled it out. A photo album. Bound in worn navy blue leather, she didn't remember putting it here. Richard must have, years ago. She sat on the dusty floor, the album heavy in her lap. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from the window. With a trembling finger, she opened the cover. The first picture was of Charlotte, age 4. She was sitting on Richard's lap on the porch swing of this very house. She had a gap-toothed smile, pigtails that stuck straight out, and she was holding a half-eaten ice cream cone. Her eyes, so full of suspicion and resentment now, were wide with simple, uncomplicated joy. Elizabeth's breath hitched. A physical pain, sharp and sudden, pierced the cold armour around her heart. She turned the page. Charlotte at 7, proudly holding up a drawing of a lopsided house with a giant sun. Charlotte at 10, on her first bike, her face a mask of fierce concentration and exhilaration. Charlotte, a teenager, awkward and gangly in a prom dress, trying to look serious, but a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. In every photo, before a certain age, there was a light in her, a brightness. Elizabeth remembered that girl, the girl who made her daisy chains and wrote her silly poems, the girl who would crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. Where did she go? Richard, his voice echoed in her memory, a constant, dripping poison. Crying is weakness, Charlotte. Second place is the first loser. Don't be sentimental. It's a flaw in your mother's character. He had chiselled away at that bright, happy child, shaping her into a hard, brittle reflection of his own insecurities. He had taught her that love was conditional, that affection was a transaction, and that vulnerability was the ultimate sin. A wave of profound, debilitating guilt washed over Elizabeth. It was so powerful it made her dizzy. She wasn't just fighting Charlotte, the cold, cruel woman who locked her in the attic. She was planning the systematic destruction of that little girl in the photograph. The daughter she had brought into the world. The daughter she had failed to protect from the slow, insidious cruelty of her own father. What had she become? In her quest for justice, was she just perpetuating the cycle of cruelty? Was she becoming Richard? The thought was nauseating. Her intricate plans, her cold-hearted strategy, Anya Sharma's ruthless efficiency. It all seemed monstrous now, a perversion of a mother's duty. Her hand shook as she reached for the burner phone. Her finger hovered over the call button. She could end it. Call Anya. Tell her the deal was off. She would sign the conservatorship papers. She would go to the nursing home. She would let them have the house. She would let the lottery ticket expire, its power dissolving back into nothing. Better to die a victim than to live as a monster. Better to let her daughter win than to destroy her completely. The ghost of love was a powerful thing. It was choking her, whispering that this was wrong, that there had to be another way. And then she heard it. The sound drifted up from downstairs, Charlotte's voice. She was on the phone, her tone light and carefree, and she was laughing. "Oh my God, you would not believe the amount of old junk she has," Charlotte said, her voice carrying clearly up the stairwell. "Boxes and boxes of it. Porcelain dolls, old letters, all of her tacky furniture. Mark and I were talking about it last night. The second we get her settled in the home, we're calling one of those estate sale companies. Just clear it all out, sell it for scrap."
It will be such a relief to have a clean slate, you know? Elizabeth froze, her finger still hovering over the phone. Sell it for scrap. Her wedding china, Richard's war medals, the rocking chair her own father had built by hand, the porcelain dolls her mother had brought from Germany, her whole life, the sum of her memories and her love, dismissed as old junk. And the laughter. It wasn't the laughter of the little girl with the ice cream cone. It was the mocking, dismissive laugh of a stranger, a predator, a woman who looked at her own mother's life and saw only clutter to be disposed of. In that moment, the ghost of love was not just exorcised, it was executed. The warm, debilitating guilt evaporated, replaced by a silence more profound and colder than the attic itself. The conflict was over. The happy child in the photograph was well and truly gone, a fossil from another lifetime. The woman downstairs was all that was left, and she had to be stopped. Elizabeth's hand was perfectly steady now. She put the burner phone away. She slowly, deliberately closed the cover of the photo album. The sound of the worn leather shutting echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of a door closing forever. She slid the album back into its dark hiding place, next to the lottery ticket. 2 secrets, side by side. One the ghost of a love that was, the other the instrument of a justice that would be. She rose to her feet, her body no longer feeling the strain or the cold. Her purpose, which had wavered for a moment, was now absolute. It had been tempered by doubt and hardened into something unbreakable. She was not destroying her daughter. She was merely holding a mirror up to the woman her daughter had chosen to become, and she was going to make sure she could never look away. The first sign was a whisper, a flicker at the edge of Charlotte's vision.
She was watering her prize-winning hydrangeas, the ones that framed the porch in perfect clouds of blue and lavender, when she saw it. Across the street, a man in a crisp suit was hammering a "For Sale" sign into the Hendersons' manicured lawn. Charlotte paused, hose in hand. The Hendersons. They'd just put in a new pool. It made no sense. She shrugged it off. People were flighty. Maybe they got a sudden job offer in another state. She went back to her flowers, humming a tune she'd heard on a podcast about minimalist living. 2 days later, Mark pointed it out from the breakfast nook, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, squinting. "The Hendersons sign is already gone. Says sold." Charlotte came to look over his shoulder. A bold red sold banner was slashed across the sign. "That was fast," she remarked, a little impressed. "Must have been a cash offer." "Must have been," Mark mumbled, a crease forming between his brows. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. The market was good, but it wasn't that good. The whispers grew louder a week later. The house to their left, the one belonging to the old money Pattersons with their immaculate rose garden, sprouted a "for sale" sign of its own. Charlotte felt a prickle of annoyance. The Pattersons were the anchors of the cul-de-sac, their annual Christmas party a staple of the local social scene. She saw Mrs. Patterson loading a box into her sedan and hurried over, manufacturing a concerned smile. "Eleanor, don't tell me you're leaving us." Eleanor Patterson, a woman normally as solid and predictable as the oak tree in her yard, looked flustered, almost guilty. "Oh, Charlotte, it was all so sudden. We got an offer we just couldn't refuse. From a developer." "A developer?" Charlotte's smile tightened. "What are they developing?" "I'm not entirely sure," Eleanor said, avoiding her eyes. "Something about a new exclusive project. They paid... well, it was a very generous offer. 20% over asking, all cash, close in 10 days. She scurried into her car before Charlotte could ask more. The Pattersons' sold sign went up the next afternoon. Then it was the house to their right. The young couple with the twin toddlers and the perpetually noisy trampoline. For sale, sold, 3 days. Then the house directly across from them. For sale, sold, 2 days. The cul-de-sac began to empty out. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a neighbourhood dying. Moving trucks became a constant, their rumbling engines and the shouts of movers replacing the familiar sounds of lawnmowers and children playing. Each departing family offered a similar vague story. An incredible unsolicited offer from a faceless company called Ethelred Estates LLC. An offer too good to pass up. They all seemed a little dazed, as if they'd won a lottery they hadn't entered. But there was a furtive quality to their haste, a reluctance to meet Charlotte's or Mark's gaze for too long.
"This is insane."
Mark paced the living room, the Persian rug muffling his agitated steps. The house felt cavernous now, the silence from outside pressing in. "Who is Ethelred Estates? I've looked them up. They're a ghost. An LLC registered in Delaware 2 months ago. No website, no history, just a mailing address at a P.O. box." "It has to be for some big new development," Charlotte said, more to convince herself than him. She was scrolling through her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Maybe a high-tech campus? Or luxury condos? Her voice was thin. The curated perfection of their life was being dismantled, brick by brick, neighbour by neighbour. The backdrop for her Instagram post was disappearing. "Then why haven't we been approached?" Mark stopped pacing and stared at her. "Our house is the centre of the cul-de-sac. It's the prime lot. If you're buying up the whole block, you start with the centerpiece, right?
Unless you're not buying it at all. The unspoken thought hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. They weren't being approached because the developer didn't want their house. The developer wanted the land around their house. They were being surgically isolated. The last family, the Garcias from the house at the end of the street, left on a Tuesday. Charlotte watched from the window as their minivan pulled away, a child's stuffed dinosaur pressed against the rear glass. Then there was nothing. An entire street of empty houses, silent and watchful. The sold signs stood like tombstones in the yards. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. In a hotel suite overlooking the placid waters of Lake Washington, Elizabeth sipped her tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and fragrant. Leo had shown her how to order it from the room service menu on the tablet. The tablet was a marvel. Everything was a marvel. The soft cashmere throw on her shoulders, the view of the seaplanes taking off, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It was the opposite of the attic. It was the opposite of silence. It was peace. Her phone, a sleek encrypted device provided by Anya Sharma, buzzed softly on the table beside her. She answered, her voice calm and steady. Anya? Good morning, Elizabeth. The final acquisition is complete. The Garcia property closed an hour ago. You now own the entire block. Anya's voice was always crisp, professional, but Elizabeth could hear the faintest trace of something else in it today. Awe. The offers were exceedingly effective. Ethelred Estates is now the sole proprietor of all 12 surrounding properties. Good, Elizabeth said, watching a ferry glide across the water. Did any of them ask questions? A few tried. They were directed to a junior associate who is an expert in saying nothing with a great many words. The money spoke louder than their curiosity. It always does. Yes, Elizabeth said softly, it does. Phase 2 is ready to be initiated on your command, Anya continued. The permits are all green-lit. The construction crews are on standby. The fencing materials are staged at a nearby warehouse. Elizabeth thought of Charlotte, standing in her perfect kitchen, suddenly finding herself the queen of a ghost town. She imagined the creeping dread, the confusion turning to fear. It was a cold, satisfying thought. It didn't bring her joy. It brought her focus. Begin phase 2 at sunrise tomorrow, Anya. Let's not keep them waiting. Consider it done. The first sound was a low, grinding roar that started precisely at 7 a.m. It wasn't the familiar, almost comforting sound of a neighbour's lawnmower. It was industrial, invasive. Mark shot out of bed, stumbling to the window. What in God's name is that? Lined up along the street were massive flatbed trucks. Men in hard hats and bright yellow vests were operating a crane, unloading huge dark grey panels. They looked like sections of a wall. A very, very high wall. Charlotte joined him, clutching her silk robe. They're building something. Right on the property line. The work was brutally efficient. A trench was dug along the perimeter of what used to be the Pattersons' yard. Metal posts, thick as tree trunks, were sunk into concrete. By noon, the first of the grey panels were being bolted into place. They were 12 feet high. Solid, windowless, and a flat, light-absorbing matte grey. Charlotte spent the morning on the phone, her voice escalating from incredulous to furious. She called the city planning department, the code enforcement office, the mayor's personal assistant. The responses were all the same. A bureaucratic wall as impenetrable as the one being erected outside. Yes, Mrs. Harris, I have the permit right here. It's for an exclusive high-security residential project. Yes, 12 feet is within the variance granted to the developer. Athelred Estates. No, I can't give you any more information. It's a private development. By the end of the day, the wall stretched the full length of their property on the left. It blocked the morning sun. The living room, once bathed in bright, cheerful light, was now cast in a permanent, dreary twilight. The next day the crew started on the right side, another wall. The day after that they began across the street, building a long, seamless barrier where 3 houses once stood. It felt like a fortress being built in reverse, not to keep people out, but to keep them in. "This is a siege," Mark whispered, standing in the middle of their driveway, turning in a slow circle. The house, their monument to success, their castle, was now sitting at the bottom of a grey plastic canyon. Their view, once a pleasant panorama of manicured lawns and friendly facades, was now just wall. Ominous, silent wall. Then came the drones. They appeared a week into the construction. Small, black, and insect-like, they hovered high above the house. At first there were 2, then 4. They moved in precise geometric patterns, their small cameras glinting in the diminished sunlight. Mark called the police. An officer came, a young man who looked bored and tired. "Sir, I can't do anything about that. They're flying over the developer's private property. They're not entering your airspace." "They're watching us," Mark yelled, his voice cracking. "They are filming my house, my family." The developer's permit includes ongoing architectural and structural surveying via unmanned aerial vehicles, the officer recited, checking his tablet. "As long as they stay over their own land, they're within their rights. I'm sorry, sir, there's nothing I can do." The drones were a constant presence, a low, persistent hum that vibrated in their teeth. They felt watched every moment. When Charlotte tried to sunbathe by the pool, a drone would reposition itself to hover directly overhead. When Mark tried to barbecue on the deck, 2 of them would descend to a lower altitude, their rotors whipping up the smoke. Their home had become a fishbowl, a prison yard. The psychological toll was immediate. They started keeping the curtains drawn. They spoke in hushed tones, convinced the drones could hear them. Mark, once so confident and outgoing, became jumpy and paranoid. Charlotte's polished social media presence began to crack. Her posts, once filled with cheerful photos of dinner parties and family outings, became frantic and angry. "Can you believe this? Our neighbourhood has been turned into a construction site prison. The city is letting this faceless corporation harass us. Hashtag Maple Creek. Hashtag City Hall fail. Hashtag harassment." She tagged everyone she could think of. The mayor, the city council, local news anchors. The response was muted. A few sympathetic comments from distant relatives, but her local friends, the ones whose opinions she craved, were conspicuously silent. The reason for their silence became clear a few days later. A friend, one of the few who still answered her calls, spoke in a hushed, uncomfortable voice. "Charlotte, people are talking." "Talking about what? The construction? I know. It's an outrage." "No," the friend said hesitantly. "Not about the construction. About you and your mother." Charlotte felt a cold pit open in her stomach. "My mother? What about my mother?" "There are rumours," online, in some of the community Facebook groups. After she hung up, her hands trembling, Charlotte found the posts. They were vague, but pointedly so. They were masterpieces of insinuation, planted by the discreet but devastatingly effective PR firm Elizabeth had hired. One post, from a popular local mummy blogger, read, "So heartbreaking to think about our seniors. We need to cherish them. Heard a terrible story recently about an elderly woman in our own community being treated like a prisoner in her own home by her family, all for greed. Makes you wonder what goes on behind closed doors in those big, beautiful houses." The post had hundreds of shares and comments, filled with outrage. "Name and shame," one person wrote. "This is why we need stronger elder abuse laws," wrote another. Another post in a neighborhood watch forum was even more direct, hearing some disturbing things about a situation on the Elm Street cul-de-sac. Before all the construction started, of course. Something about an elderly parent being locked away when company was over. "If anyone has information, please feel free to message me privately. We have to protect our most vulnerable." Charlotte felt the blood rush from her face. It was a character assassination, executed with surgical precision. The construction, the drones. It wasn't just about isolating them physically, it was about isolating them socially. It was about turning their carefully constructed world into a panopticon, where they were the sole inmates judged by everyone. Her friends stopped calling back. Invitations dried up. When she went to the grocery store, she saw people she'd known for years whisper to each other as she passed, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. Mark came home from a golf game, his face pale. "They wouldn't play with me, Lottie, my regular foursome. They said they were uncomfortable." They were pariahs, trapped in their grey canyon. The hum of the drones a constant reminder of their fall from grace. They were alone, utterly and completely alone. The final blow came on a crisp autumn morning. The air was still, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The silence of the dead neighborhood was broken by the sharp rap of a fist on their front door. Mark opened it to find their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, standing on the porch. His face was grim, his expensive suit looking rumpled and defeated. "Peterson, what is it? Is it the court date? Did you get the conservatorship hearing moved up?" Mark asked, his voice desperate. Peterson stepped inside, clutching his briefcase like a shield. "The hearing was this morning, Mark. I tried to call you." "This morning? Why weren't we told?" Charlotte demanded, rushing into the foyer. "It was an emergency session, requested by Anya Sharma's office. The judge granted it." Peterson wouldn't meet their eyes. He looked at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at them. "So, what happened?" Mark pressed. "Tell me the judge saw reason. Tell me we got it." Peterson finally looked up, and his expression was one of complete capitulation. The judge didn't just dismiss our petition, she was scathing. She called it a frivolous and malicious attempt to defraud a vulnerable senior. "Vulnerable?" Charlotte shrieked. "She's losing her mind. We had a doctor's evaluation." Anya Sharma's team brought in two of the top geriatric psychiatrists from Johns Hopkins, Peterson said, his voice flat. "They had been meeting with your mother via secure video link for weeks. They presented a full cognitive assessment. They made our doctor look like an incompetent fool."
The judge praised your mother's astounding lucidity and sharp wit. She's ordering an investigation into Dr. Miller for professional misconduct. Mark stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. No. It gets worse, Peterson said, his voice barely a whisper. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. It was a sharp, impatient sound. Mark, dazed, opened the door. A man in a cheap suit stood there, holding a manila envelope. Mark Harris? Charlotte Harris? The man asked brusquely. Yes? The man shoved the envelope into Mark's hand. You've been served. He turned and walked away without another word. Mark's hands trembled as he tore open the envelope. His face went white. He held up the document for Charlotte to see. At the top, in stark, bold letters, were 2 words. Eviction notice. What is this? Charlotte snatched the paper. This is our house. It's paid for. This is a joke. It's not a joke, Peterson said, his voice hollow. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue. This is a copy of your father's will and the trust he established. I've had my team going over it all night. We missed something. Anya Sharma didn't. He pointed to a paragraph on page 47. It's called the Beneficiary Protection Clause. Your father was a bastard, but he was a clever bastard. The clause states that the primary beneficiary of the trust, your mother, retains lifetime residency rights in the property. Standard stuff. But then there's a subclause. Subclause 4B. He took a deep breath. It states that any attempt, legal or otherwise, to have the primary beneficiary declared incapacitated, or to have her forcibly removed and committed to a long-term care facility, would immediately trigger a default. The ownership of the house and all assets within the primary trust would automatically transfer to a secondary, pre-established trust. Charlotte stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. A secondary trust? Who controls the secondary trust? Peterson finally met her gaze. The pity in his eyes was like a physical blow. Your mother does, Charlotte. As of 9:15 this morning, when Judge Albright dismissed your petition, your mother became your landlord. And she's evicting you. The world tilted. The carefully constructed floor of Charlotte's life fell away, leaving her in a free fall. The walls outside weren't to keep them in, they were to frame the stage. The drones weren't just for surveillance, they were the audience. The social isolation, the rumours, it was all prelude. This was the main event. A rage, pure and primal, boiled up inside her, burning away the shock. Her mother. This was her mother's doing. The frail, forgetful old woman she'd pitied and despised. It was all an act, a long, elaborate, monstrous act. Where is she? Charlotte's voice was a low growl. She has to be here. She has to be in the attic. Charlotte, don't... Mark started, but she was already gone, sprinting for the stairs. She didn't run like a homeowner. She ran like a predator, her heels clicking a frantic, furious rhythm on the hardwood floors. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The attic. That's where the rat was hiding. She would drag her out. She would make her look at her, make her answer for this. She reached the top of the second-floor landing and yanked on the pull cord for the attic stairs. They unfolded with a familiar groaning complaint. She scrambled up into the dusty darkness, her eyes scanning wildly. "Mother, show yourself! You coward, you can't hide from me." But the attic was empty. It was cleaner than she'd ever seen it. The dust was gone, the piles of forgotten junk, the old trunks, the boxes of her childhood memories, all cleared away. The air was cool and still. The single bare bulb was gone, replaced by soft recessed lighting. And against the far wall, where the old water-stained drywall used to be, was a large, sleek, professional-grade television screen. It was mounted perfectly, its black surface reflecting her own heaving, distorted image. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a pre-recorded message, it was a live feed. The image was crystal clear, the sound perfect. It showed a woman sitting in a plush armchair. Behind her, through a floor-to-ceiling window, a setting sun painted a sky of orange and purple over a glittering body of water. The woman was Elizabeth, but it was not the Elizabeth that Charlotte knew. This woman was not frail. She was not stooped or hesitant. She sat upright, her posture regal. She wore a simple but elegant silk blouse in a shade of deep sapphire that made her silver hair shine. Her face, free from the lines of stress and fear, looked 10 years younger. She was not angry. She was not triumphant. She was serene. A terrifying, absolute serenity. She looked directly into the camera, directly at Charlotte, standing stunned and breathless in the cold, empty attic. Elizabeth's voice filled the space, calm and even, delivered not with the quaver of age, but with the clarity of a bell. "You loved the attic so much, Charlotte," she said, her words gentle, yet each one a hammer blow. "You always said it was my place, my own private space." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I thought you and Mark should have it all to yourselves." As she spoke the last word, Charlotte's phone, still clutched in her hand, began to vibrate violently. Then Mark's phone began to ring from downstairs. Then her phone buzzed again and again. Notifications, texts, calls, a deluge. Elizabeth's serene face remained on the screen. "Leo is very clever with computers," she said, almost as an afterthought. "He's just sent a link to a new website to every journalist, social media influencer and community leader in the state. He's calling it theatticproject.com. Charlotte's blood ran cold. She looked at the screen, at the live feed of her powerful, untouchable mother. She looked around the empty, sterile attic, her prison, now her stage. She heard the phones ringing and buzzing downstairs, an electronic chorus of their public execution. The walls outside weren't a cage, they were a frame, and she was the art, a portrait of ruin. The digital storm broke not with a thunderclap, but with the relentless humming poison of 1 billion screens lighting up in unison. Charlotte's perfectly curated life, her Instagram feed of wholesome family moments and charity galas, was now a digital graveyard. Every post was flooded. The comments were a torrent of snakes. "Elder abuser. Rot in that house you stole. I hope you like attics, Charlotte." They came from everywhere and nowhere, a faceless jury delivering a sentence of 1,000 cuts. News vans were a permanent fixture on the street, their long-lensed cameras pointed at the house like cannons. At first, they had camped out hoping for a shot of the disgraced couple, but after days of nothing, they simply kept their vigil, a constant, humming reminder of the siege. Inside, the silence was thicker than the dust in the attic had ever been. It was a suffocating, heavy thing, broken only by the ping of another notification on their phones, another email from a lawyer they could no longer afford, another friend's number that now went straight to voicemail. Mark sat at the dining room table, staring at a stack of bills that had become a monument to their ruin. The legal fees from the guardianship battle alone were astronomical. Now, With every brand partnership Charlotte had ever secured pulling out, with Mark's firm asking him to take an indefinite leave of absence, the numbers were simply impossible. He finally looked up at Charlotte, who was pacing back and forth in the living room, her movements sharp and agitated, like a caged animal. Her hair was unwashed, her expensive loungewear was stained with something she didn't remember spilling. Mark's voice was a dry rasp. They cancelled the last of our credit cards this morning. Charlotte didn't stop pacing. So, call them back. Yell at them. Threaten to sue. Do something. With what, Charlotte? With what money? Who do you think is going to give us credit? Our names are poison. You're not just Charlotte Harris anymore, you're Attic Mom. It's a meme. Did you know that? There are TikToks. People are putting on grey wigs and pretending to be your mother, dancing to some horrible song. She flinched as if struck. Don't call me that. It's what they're calling you. It's what everyone is calling you. He swiped a hand across his face. We can't sell the house. No one will touch it. It's infamous. It's a tourist attraction for ghouls. People drive by and take pictures. We're living in a public monument to our own failure. It's her fault, Charlotte hissed, her voice low and venomous. She finally stopped pacing and stared out the window, past the high fences, at the news van parked across the street. She did this. She planned it all, that senile old woman. She wasn't senile, was she? Mark said, a note of bitter, dawning clarity in his voice. She was playing us. All of it. The forgetfulness, the confusion. She played us like a damn fiddle while she was sitting on a winning lottery ticket. She cheated, Charlotte whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She must have. Or Leo, that little traitor. He helped her. He brought her the phone. He was in on it from the beginning. Egazova leaved and Dawson. The accusation hung in the air, pathetic and weak. They both knew the truth. They had been arrogant, they had been cruel, and they had underestimated the quiet, frail woman they had locked away. They had seen weakness and thought it was an invitation. They had never considered it could be a disguise. Miles away, in a minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering expanse of Seattle, Elizabeth sat in a sterile white armchair. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. The city sprawled below her, a web of lights and motion. It was the kind of view that was supposed to make you feel powerful, on top of the world. She felt nothing. On a large screen mounted to the wall, a cable news anchor was speaking with a psychologist. What we're seeing is a cultural phenomenon, the psychologist was saying, her expression serious. Elizabeth Harris has become a symbol of rebellion, a folk hero for anyone who has ever felt voiceless or oppressed. She's the matriarch of vengeance. People are rallying behind her, not just because of the abuse she suffered, but because of the sheer brilliance of her response. It's a modern-day myth. Elizabeth picked up the remote and turned the screen off. The silence that filled the room was just as profound as the one in Maple Creek, but it was different. It wasn't heavy with despair. It was thin, empty, the silence of a void. Anya Sharma sat opposite her, holding a tablet. She had come to deliver the final financial reports, a summary of assets that now numbered in the 9 figures. She was dressed in her usual immaculate razor-sharp suit. The last of their accounts have been frozen to cover the initial legal retainers they defaulted on, Anya said, her voice crisp and professional. They are, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. They cannot leave the house because they have nowhere to go and no funds to do so. They cannot sell it. You have achieved your goal, Elizabeth. You have built their prison. Elizabeth didn't look at her. She stared out at the city lights. Yes, I have. Anya waited, sensing this wasn't the triumphant moment she had anticipated for her client. You don't seem pleased. Pleased? Elizabeth's voice was quiet, a fragile thing in the vast, empty room. I watched my daughter on the news yesterday. They used a hidden camera. She was trying to get groceries delivered, but the driver refused to bring them to the door. He just left them on the curb. She was screaming at him. Her face was ugly, twisted. I've never seen her look like that. She made her choices, Anya said, her tone softening slightly. This is the consequence, is it? Elizabeth finally turned her gaze from the window to Anya. Her eyes, which had held such a cold, hard fire for months, now looked tired. So incredibly tired. I destroyed her. I took everything from her. Her home, her reputation, her future.
What does that make me?
That makes you a survivor, Anya stated simply. It feels like it makes me a monster, Elizabeth whispered. I raised that girl. I held her when she was sick. I remember she had this little stuffed bear she couldn't sleep without. She called it Barnaby. She loved that bear so much. And I can't reconcile the little girl who loved Barnaby with the woman screaming on the sidewalk. She picked up a small framed photograph from the table beside her. It was an old one, faded with time. A young, smiling Elizabeth holding the hand of a little girl with bright, happy eyes and a missing front tooth. Charlotte. I won, Anya. I have all this money, I have this view, I have justice, and it all tastes like ash in my mouth. It's the loneliest victory I could have ever imagined. She set the photo down, her hand trembling slightly. I thought this would feel good. I thought it would feel like freedom, but it just feels over. Over the things that the hollowness of it was an ache that wealth couldn't soothe. The public adoration felt like a mockery. They cheered for the matriarch of vengeance, but they didn't see the mother who had just witnessed the complete and utter destruction of her own child, a destruction she had meticulously engineered. She had escaped the attic, but she had brought its suffocating silence with her. The fight was done, the enemy was vanquished, and in the quiet aftermath all she could feel was the profound, echoing loss of what could have been. The war was won, but she was the only one left on the battlefield, surrounded by ghosts. A week passed in that sterile quiet. Elizabeth barely ate. She didn't answer calls, not even from Leo. She just sat in her white armchair, watching the city live and breathe below her, a world she was no longer a part of. The victory wasn't enough. The prison she had built for Charlotte and Mark felt too simple, too mundane. Ruin was temporary. Social shame could fade. She needed something else. Something permanent. Something that would stand as a testament not just to her victory, but to the silence itself. The silence that had nearly killed her. The silence she now wore like a shroud. The thought came to her, not in a flash of inspiration, but as a slow, cold certainty. Her revenge wasn't complete. She hadn't just been fighting Charlotte and Mark. She had been fighting the very walls of that house, the quiet complicity of the neighbourhood, the polite, suffocating culture that allowed such cruelty to fester behind closed doors. Her final act couldn't just be about punishment. It had to be about art. A terrible, monstrous, beautiful work of art. She finally picked up her phone and called Anya Sharma. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer tired. It was clear and cold as ice. Anya, I have a new project for you. I'm ready to announce my plans for the properties in Maple Creek after dark. The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. It was packed. Every major news outlet was there, along with a swarm of online journalists and influencers, all hungry for the next chapter in the saga of Elizabeth Harris. Anya Sharma stood at the podium, a picture of calm, formidable power. On behalf of my client, she began, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. I am here today to announce her intentions for the properties she has acquired in the Maple Creek cul-de-sac. A murmur went through the crowd. This was it. Was she building a luxury compound, a charity centre? The 9 properties surrounding the Harris family home are scheduled for demolition beginning next month. A new wave of whispers, demolition, total erasure. Anya let the drama hang in the air for a moment before continuing. In their place, my client is funding the establishment of a new, unique cultural institution. It will be called the Museum of Domestic Silence and Stunned Silence. A few reporters exchanged confused glances. The name was strange, poetic, and deeply unsettling. This will not be a traditional museum, Anya explained, her eyes sweeping across the room. It will be an architectural and psychological installation, a place for reflection on the secrets families keep and the quiet tragedies that unfold behind closed doors. She gestured to a large screen behind her. An architectural rendering flickered to life. It showed a sleek, modern, low-slung building, almost brutalist in its design, surrounding a single, untouched suburban house, the Harris House. The centerpiece of the museum, Anya's voice dropped, becoming more deliberate, will be the Harris residence itself. It will be preserved in its entirety, exactly as it is today. Visitors to the museum will be able to look into the home through specially designed one-way glass windows, viewing the rooms where this family's story unfolded. It will be a living exhibit. A reporter in the front row shot his hand up. A living exhibit? What about the residents, Charlotte and Mark Harris? Are they being evicted? Anya gave a thin, cold smile. It was the smile of a shark that knows the taste of blood is imminent. On the contrary, my client is a great believer in poetic justice. According to the legal framework we have established, Mr. and Mrs. Harris will be legally permitted to live out the remainder of their days in the house, rent-free. The room erupted, shouts, questions, the frantic clicking of cameras. Anya held up a hand for silence. They will have one condition attached to their residency, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. They will be designated as the home's official unpaid curators, responsible for its upkeep, required to maintain it exactly as it was on the day my client revealed her triumph. They will be curators of their own cruelty. The sheer diabolical brilliance of it settled over the room, leaving everyone breathless. But Anya wasn't finished. There is one more feature of the museum that my client wished for me to share. The rendering on the screen behind her changed. It zoomed in on the house, then moved upwards, through the roof, to the attic. The attic, Anya said, her voice barely more than a whisper now, imbued with a chilling reverence. The place of my client's suffering. It will be recreated. Every detail will be perfect. The single bare mattress, the dusty wooden beams, the loose floorboard where she hid her hope. But it will not be made of wood and plaster. The image on the screen resolved into a new, terrifying picture. The attic, rendered in perfect, impossible detail, was a solid, glistening black. It will be cast from a single, monolithic block of polished black obsidian. A monstrous, silent, eternal monument to what she endured. It will be visible from the main house, from the windows of the master bedroom, where Charlotte and Mark will sleep, a permanent, unblinking reminder of the darkness they cultivated. In the house on Maple Creek, Charlotte and Mark watched the press conference on a small laptop, the Wi-Fi stolen from a neighbouring signal they'd managed to crack. Mark's face was slack with disbelief. It was a horror beyond comprehension. Charlotte began to make a strange, strangled sound, a laugh that was half a sob. Curators, she choked out, the word bubbling up from her throat. She's making us exhibits in a zoo. The official notice arrived by courier the next day, a thick packet of legal documents outlining the terms of the new arrangement. It detailed their duties, the cleaning schedules, the requirement that no furniture be moved, the fact that their utilities and a small stipend for maintenance would be provided by the museum's trust, binding them to it forever. They were prisoners, not just in a house, but in a narrative. Their lives were no longer their own. They were a story to be told, a lesson to be learned, encased in glass and concrete and judgment. Mark dropped the papers on the floor. He walked to the window and looked out. The first of the surveyors were already there, planting stakes in the neighbours' lawns. The walls were, quite literally, closing in. Months later, when the first chill of autumn began to strip the leaves from the trees, Elizabeth and Leo stood on a grassy hill overlooking Maple Creek. Below them, the construction was well underway. The neighbouring houses were gone, replaced by a vast foundation of concrete and steel rebar. The high black fences that had once isolated the Harris house now formed the outer perimeter of the museum grounds. And in the centre of it all, looking smaller and more fragile than ever, was the house, a preserved specimen in a jar. Leo, no longer a boy, stood tall beside her. The fear that had lived in his eyes for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He held her hand, his grip firm and steady.
"I got my acceptance letter from Stanford this morning," he said, his voice carrying on the crisp air. "The computer science program." Elizabeth squeezed his hand, a genuine small smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Oh, Leo, that's wonderful. Your grandfather would have been so proud." "I think he'd be proud of you too," Leo said, looking down at the construction site. Elizabeth followed his gaze. She didn't feel pride. She didn't feel happiness. What she felt was a vast, calm and terrifying peace. It was the quiet that comes after a devastating storm has passed, leaving a landscape that is scoured clean, unrecognizable. The freedom she had purchased had come at the price of everything she had once called her family. She had lost a daughter, but in doing so had freed her grandson. It was a brutal, unforgiving calculus. "I won't ever go back there," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "Not even when it's finished." "You don't have to," Leo replied. "You built it. You don't have to live in it." She knew he was right. She had escaped the attic. But in a way, she had also become its architect. She had taken her sorrow and her rage and her pain and forged them into a monument of stone and glass and silence. She was the god of her own sorrowful new world. From this hill, she could see the dark shape of the obsidian block, shrouded in canvas, waiting to be hoisted into place. Her silent, eternal scream, given form. The ending wasn't happy. There was no joyful reunion, no tearful forgiveness. Justice, she had learned, was not a gentle thing. It was a fire that burned away the rot but left scars on the earth behind it. It was the end of a long and terrible war. And all that was left were the ruins, the quiet, and the heavy, heavy price of freedom. She looked at Leo,
but the future stretching out before him, a future she had bought for him, and knew that for him, at least, it was worth it. What does true justice look like when the wounds are within a family? Was Elizabeth's masterpiece a righteous monument or a terrible new prison of her own making? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what you would have done.